Okay, so picture this. 2 kingdoms, 1 land, a ton of family drama, and some seriously intense leadership choices. We're talking kings who aren't just dealing with politics, but also family feuds, spiritual battles, and, well, the kind of decisions that test their faith to the max. And honestly, some of the stuff that happens, wow, it's wild, but stick with me, because these stories aren't just history. They're packed with lessons about loyalty, courage, and, yeah, what it really means to choose God over everything else. Alright, so let's dive into the crazy as kind of tangled world of Israel right after the kingdom split. I promise, it's not as boring as it sounds because, honestly, things get messy fast. So after Solomon's reign, the kingdom of Israel splits into 2 parts. You've got the northern kingdom, which keeps the name Israel, and the southern kingdom, which is called Judah. And already, you're like, wait, why the split? Well, there's a lot of tension, politics, and yeah, some family drama going on. And basically, people weren't happy with Rehoboam, Solomon's son, so he ends up ruling the south, and Jeroboam takes the north. So right from the start, it's divided, like a family that can't agree on which movie to watch, except with way higher stakes. Now, each kingdom has its own capital. The north sets up in Samaria, which will be super important later, and the south stays in Jerusalem. So, we already have 2 centers of power, 2 sets of courts, and 2 kings who are constantly kind of side-eyeing each other. And here's where it gets a little tricky, because if you just casually look at the names, you might get them mixed up. I mean, I totally did when I first studied this. Rehoboam rules the south, Jeroboam rules the north, and then their kids start taking over. And if you're not paying attention, you'll swear they switched places just to confuse you. So, let's focus on the south for a minute. Rehoboam dies, and his son Abijam takes over as king of Judah. And Abijam, well, he's kind of a continuation of his father in a lot of ways. Not exactly the hero type. He follows the same patterns as Rehoboam, which, if you remember, weren't the best. But here's something interesting. Abijam's mother is Ma, and she's actually the granddaughter of Abishalom, or Absalom if you prefer the more familiar name. And, okay, pause for a second because family trees in the Bible can be wild. Absalom was one of David's sons, and he led a revolt against his own father. I mean, talk about family drama. So, Abijam is literally the great-grandson of David through Ma. That's a big deal because it shows how the royal line is trying to maintain legitimacy, even in this messy, divided context. Anyway, Abijam doesn't exactly set a shining example. The Bible says he walked in all the sins of his father Rehoboam. His heart wasn't loyal to God like David's was, which, yeah, is a bit of a bummer because he had a chance to shine and change things up, but he didn't. Still, for David's sake, God allowed Abijam to reign and continue the line in Jerusalem. And it's kind of amazing when you think about it. Like, even with all the mistakes, God's plan keeps moving forward. It's a bit comforting in a weird way. Honestly, switching back to the north, Jeroboam is still alive and ruling Israel. The northern kingdom is kind of a hotspot for tension right now because Jeroboam had already set up those infamous golden calves to keep his people from going down to Jerusalem to worship. So right from the start, the north has this tendency to drift into idolatry, which makes the political and spiritual landscape even more complicated. And Jeroboam is not just dealing with political rivals, he's also managing all these rebellions, keeping the kingdom from splitting further, and, well, trying to keep God's anger at bay. It's like walking a tightrope while juggling flaming swords. Honestly, back to Abijam. He reigns for 3 years in Jerusalem, and during that short time, there's constant conflict with Jeroboam in the north. The Bible even says there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam all the days of his reign. So basically, from day one, the south is in defense mode, trying to hold onto its territory and identity while dealing with this northern threat. And you can kind of picture it, a young king, under pressure from day one, trying to navigate the family politics, the history of rebellion, and the looming threat from Israel. Not exactly an easy gig. Another thing to note is the family connections. Ma, Abijam's mother, is a descendant of Absalom, like we said, which ties back to King David. And even though Abijam isn't described as a righteous king, the lineage is important. It's like a reminder that the throne of Judah is still tied to David, which gives the southern kingdom a sort of legitimacy that the north can't claim in the same way. Jeroboam doesn't have that same direct connection to David, so politically, he's a bit on shaky ground even though he's ruling the larger territory. So here's where it gets really tricky, keeping track of who's who. Rehoboam in the south dies, Abijam takes over, and Jeroboam is still ruling the north. The northern and southern kingdoms are constantly at odds, so you've got wars, alliances, and betrayals happening all the time. And if you're just listening casually, it can feel like you're watching a soap opera with kings instead of actors. One minute there's peace, the next minute there's a battle. And all the while, these guys are trying to figure out how to stay on God's good side, which, spoiler alert, not all of them manage very well. The thing with Abijam, though, is that even though he didn't have a heart fully devoted to God like David did, his reign is still part of the bigger story. Now, it's a reminder that history isn't just shaped by the perfect people, it's shaped by real people, with all their flaws, mistakes, and family baggage. And in the case of Judah and Israel, those human imperfections mix with political tension, spiritual choices, and military conflict in a way that keeps everything incredibly volatile. Now, one last thing before we move on from Abijam. His reign is short, and after him, things start to shift in Judah. But the line of David continues, which is super important. It sets the stage for Asa, who's about to come in and make some bold moves that we'll talk about later. So, even though the kingdom is divided and the early kings aren't perfect, the story of Judah keeps moving forward, and the promises tied to David's lineage remain intact. So yeah, in summary, Israel splits into north and south after Solomon. Jeroboam rules the north from Samaria. Rehoboam rules the south from Jerusalem. Abijam takes over in the south after Rehoboam dies. He's tied to David through his mother Ma. And his reign is short and full of conflict with Jeroboam. The north is already drifting into idolatry, and the south is trying to hold onto its identity and the Davidic promise. And if you think about it, all of this, family drama, political tension, spiritual challenges, is really setting the stage for the big lessons about leadership, faith, and making choices that we'll see unfold in the next chapters. It's messy, it's complicated, but honestly, it's also kind of fascinating when you think about it as a story about real people trying to figure out loyalty, God, and power at the same time. Okay, now things start to get really interesting because Abijam's short and somewhat messy reign comes to an end, and Asa steps onto the scene as king of Judah. And let me tell you, this guy, he's a game changer. First off, he reigns for 41 years in Jerusalem. Yes, 41, that's huge. I mean, compared to some of these other kings who barely lasted a few years, Asa's longevity is impressive. But it's not just that he reigns a long time, it's what he does with that time that makes him stand out. So Asa takes over, and immediately you can see that he's not just content with sitting on the throne and collecting taxes. He's got a vision, and part of that vision is to honor God in a way that the previous kings hadn't quite managed. Remember, his father Abijam walked in the sins of Rehoboam, so Asa is basically stepping into a kingdom that's spiritually messy. Idols everywhere, cultic practices happening openly, and some of them even encouraged by his own family. And here's where it gets wild. His grandmother Ma, the same Ma who's the granddaughter of Abishalom and tied to the royal Davidic line, is actually supporting this idolatry. Wait, what? Yeah. It's kind of shocking when you think about it that your own grandmother is promoting worship that goes completely against God's commands. Talk about awkward family dynamics, right? So Asa doesn't just sit there and hope things will improve. He acts. He takes decisive steps to remove the perverted influences from the land, which, yes, included what the footnotes call sodomites, basically homosexual cultic prostitutes who were part of the idol worship practices at the time. This is a society deeply immersed in idolatry, and Asa is cutting that out. And he doesn't stop there. He also removes all the idols his ancestors had set up, every single one he can find. He gets rid of, and then comes the big personal moment. He confronts his grandmother, Ma. Can you imagine? Your grandma is in charge of some of these idol worship practices, and you have to go in and say, nope, that stops now. I mean, talk about family tension. And here's where Asa's faith shines through. He chooses God over family. He could have softened the approach, let Ma stay, kept the peace, but he knew that honoring God had to come first. It's a tough call, but he does it. And yes, he literally removes her from her position as Queen Mother and destroys the obscene image she made of Asher, which, by the way, was a symbol associated with the Canaanite goddess of fertility and sexuality. So, I know that sounds graphic, but the point is, he's confronting not just idols, but deeply entrenched spiritual corruption, and he's doing it even when it hits close to home. And here's the lesson that just hits you in the gut. Sometimes choosing God means making hard choices with the people you love. Jesus even talks about this in Matthew 10:34-37, saying, I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. Meaning that following him can create division, even within families. And Asa? He lived this out. He made a choice that many would find unthinkable. He stood up for God, even if it meant standing against family members. But here's the interesting thing. He didn't act out of hatred or spite. He acted out of love for God and a vision for his kingdom. And you can kind of feel it when you read the story. There's courage, there's determination, and there's also a touch of gravity because he knows the consequences. Now, after all that, Asa continues his reforms. He brings a broader spiritual revival to Judah. He doesn't just clean house at the top, he also focuses on restoring the temple and the worship practices there. He brings in the silver, gold, and utensils dedicated to God by his father and himself and uses them to enhance the house of the Lord. It's like he's saying, okay, we're going all in, no half measures here. And this is significant because it's not just symbolic, it's about re-establishing a culture of worship and reverence in Judah after years of neglect and corruption. And keep in mind, he's doing this while there's still political pressure from the north. It's not like he's operating in a vacuum. He's navigating external threats, internal reforms, and family drama all at once. I mean, imagine the pressure. But here's where Asa's story really hits home for us today. He's showing that leadership isn't just about power or strategy, it's about loyalty and values. He's setting the tone for his kingdom and making it clear that God's commands take priority over personal comfort, family ties, or even political expediency. And he does it consistently. Verse after verse highlights that Asa's heart was loyal to the Lord all his days. And that's remarkable because even though he's a human being with flaws, his consistent focus on God makes him stand out among the kings of Judah. There's also this fascinating tension between reform and imperfection. Even though Asa removes idols and brings a revival, he doesn't get rid of all the high places, the open worship sites on elevated ground where people had set up idols. So there's this little crack in the door for continued idolatry. It's kind of like he's making huge strides, but he's also human. He can't control everything. And honestly, that makes him relatable. Leadership is messy, reforms are messy, and doing what's right doesn't always mean you get a perfect outcome immediately. One of the coolest parts of Asa's story is how he models the principle of leaving a new legacy. He didn't repeat the sins of his father, Abijam, or his grandfather, Rehoboam. He looked at the past, saw where things had gone wrong, and intentionally chose a different path. And that's huge, right? Because it shows that our backgrounds, our family histories, even the mistakes of our ancestors don't have to define us. We can make intentional choices to honor God and create a positive impact that lasts beyond our lifetime. It's like he's saying, yeah, the past was messy, but the future, that's in God's hands, and I'm going to lead with him at the center. And let's talk a bit about the human side here. Can you imagine the conversations in the palace? Asa has to tell his grandmother that her idol is coming down. You can just picture Ma reacting, shock, maybe some indignation, probably some passive-aggressive comments. And Asa has to stay calm, respectful, and firm. He's balancing authority with tact, courage with compassion, and all of it grounded in his commitment to God. I mean, if that doesn't hit home for real-life situations, family conflicts, standing up for what you believe, it's hard to imagine what will. And the results of Asa's reforms aren't just spiritual, they're practical too. By removing the corrupt influences and re-establishing proper worship, he strengthens the kingdom socially and morally. People see that their king is serious about justice, righteousness, and faithfulness. It creates a sense of stability, even with the ongoing external threats from the northern kingdom. It's like cleaning a messy room. Once the clutter is gone, it's easier to see clearly, move efficiently, and feel safe. And in Asa's case, the spiritual clutter was gone, at least in part, which allows Judah to thrive under his long reign. But let's not sugarcoat it. Asa's actions are bold and risky. Removing idols, confronting family, enforcing reforms, all of this could have backfired. People could have resisted him. There could have been unrest. And yes, the North is always a looming threat. Yet Asa's loyalty to God anchors him. He's making decisions based on principles, not convenience or fear. And that's a lesson that resonates today. Choosing what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, is the mark of true leadership. And here's another layer. The story of Asa also shows the importance of accountability and perspective. He's not just doing what feels right in the moment. He's looking at the long-term implications for his kingdom, his family, and his people. He's measuring his actions against God's standards, not human expectations, and that kind of wisdom is rare. It's easy to get caught up in immediate pressures, but Asa demonstrates that aligning with God provides a foundation that helps navigate even the messiest situations. So, as Asa reigns, the kingdom sees a shift. The idols are gone, the temple is restored, and there's a clear message. God is first, and yes, it sometimes causes tension, but the legacy he establishes is significant, and that's really what makes Asa stand out. He's not perfect, but he's consistent, committed, and courageous. And in the grand narrative of Judah, that kind of leadership sets the stage for generations to come. It's also kind of inspiring when you think about it in a personal sense. We all have situations where our values or beliefs might conflict with family expectations, social norms, or even our own comfort. And like Asa, sometimes we have to make tough calls, stand up for what we know is right, even if it's uncomfortable. And the story shows that it's possible to do this with integrity, courage, and care, balancing respect for others with faithfulness to God. And yeah, there's a little humor in imagining it. Asa, a young king, probably feeling a mix of nervousness and determination, telling Grandma Ma, "Sorry, Nana, not today. Your idol comes down." You can picture the awkwardness, the tension, the raised eyebrows, and yet, Asa handles it with conviction. It makes the story feel real, like these were actual people, not just characters in a textbook. Ultimately, Asa's reign teaches us that being a leader, or even just living faithfully, isn't about being perfect. It's about consistency, courage, and making God the center of your decisions. Even in the face of family pressure, social expectations, or political complexity, Asa shows that prioritizing God above all else creates a legacy that lasts. And it's not just for kings, it's for anyone willing to stand up, make tough choices, and lead with faith at the core. So yeah, Asa becoming king isn't just a historical footnote. It's a story packed with lessons about faith, family, courage, and spiritual reform. And the best part? It's relatable. We all face situations where we have to choose principles over convenience, God over popularity, and long-term integrity over short-term comfort. Asa shows us it's possible to do that, and he did it for decades, leaving a lasting mark on Judah that set the stage for the future. And honestly, reading about it, you can't help but feel inspired to think about the choices in your own life and what kind of legacy you want to leave. Alright, so now that Asa is firmly established as a king of Judah, things start to get really intense on the political and military side of the story. Remember, we've got two kingdoms here, Judah in the south and Israel in the north. And the north isn't just sitting around twiddling their thumbs. They've got kings like Baasha, who is ambitious, ruthless, and absolutely determined to assert control over the region. Baasha is the kind of king who doesn't just sit back and watch. He actively goes after his neighbors. And Judah, with Asa on the throne, is right in his crosshairs. So, Baasha comes up against Judah and starts fortifying his position. He builds this place called Ramah right on the border, which is basically a blockade to prevent anyone from going in or out. Think of it like a big strategic choke point. No trade, no movement, just a very clear message. I control this area, and you're going to have a hard time moving around. And this is Asa's first real test as king, not just in leadership or spiritual reform, but in defense strategy. Now, here's where Asa makes a move that, at first glance, seems pretty clever. He takes all the silver and gold from the temple treasuries and the royal treasuries and sends it to Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, who's based in Damascus. And Asa's thinking is like, okay, if I bribe Ben-Hadad to attack the north, then Baasha will have to retreat and I'll be safe for now. Strategically, it kind of works. Ben-Hadad does attack the northern cities, places like Dan, Abel, and regions around the Sea of Galilee, and Baasha stops building Ramah and retreats to Tirzah. On the surface, Asa's plan is a temporary win. He's bought some breathing room. But here's the twist, and the lesson that really jumps out from the story. Just because a plan works in the short term doesn't mean it's the right plan spiritually. Enter the prophet Hanani. He shows up and gives Asa a hard truth check. Hanani basically says, "Hey Asa, remember when you relied on the Lord before and he delivered your enemies into your hands? This time, you relied on human strategy instead of God, and that's why your situation isn't as secure as you think." Ouch, right? Talk about a reality check. It's like the prophet is saying, yeah, your plan might have some short-term effects, but God's plan is the one that actually lasts. And Asa's reaction, not exactly what you'd hope for. He gets angry at the prophet and even puts him in prison. It's a human moment, honestly. I mean, who wouldn't feel a little defensive if someone came in and called out your decisions? Especially when they're your king and you've just done what you thought was smart. But the story doesn't shy away from showing that even good people, even righteous kings like Asa, can make mistakes when they rely on human solutions instead of God's guidance. This is one of those moments that really sticks with you because it's relatable. We all have situations where we think we know the best way forward. Maybe we try to solve problems with money, connections, or clever strategies. And sometimes, yeah, it seems to work. But the deeper lesson here is that God's intervention is what ultimately provides lasting solutions. Asa's reliance on Syria bought him a temporary victory, but it wasn't rooted in faith. And Hanani's rebuke reminds us that shortcuts or human-centered strategies aren't substitutes for trusting God. The conflict between Judah and Israel doesn't stop there, though. Baasha remains a persistent threat in the north, and Asa continues to face challenges throughout his reign. There's a back-and-forth dynamic where Judah is trying to maintain stability, defend its borders, and continue the spiritual reforms Asa initiated. And while Asa's decision to use Ben-Hadad shows human ingenuity, it also highlights the tension between strategy and faith. It's not that planning ahead or making smart moves is wrong, it's that those actions shouldn't replace reliance on God. And there's something really fascinating about this story. It shows that even a king who is otherwise righteous and committed to God can slip into relying on human solutions. Asa had been making incredible spiritual progress, removing idols, confronting corrupt family members, restoring worship practices. But when it came to military strategy, he took matters into his own hands. It's a powerful reminder that we need to stay consistent in all areas of life. We can't compartmentalize our faith or leave God out of parts of our decision making. If we do, we risk short-term solutions that might not honor him in the long run. But let's zoom in on the battle itself for a minute. When Ben-Hadad attacks Israel, he targets multiple cities, and the northern king Baasha is forced to respond. It's chaotic, violent, and stressful. Asa's plan works to the extent that Baasha halts his expansion, but it doesn't eliminate the threat. Judah is still vulnerable, and the ongoing conflict serves as a constant reminder that relying on human resources alone has limits. There's a temporary victory, yes, but the deeper security that comes from God's guidance is still missing. And you can kind of feel the tension when reading about Hanani confronting Asa. It's not just a historical note, it's a human interaction full of emotion, accountability, and divine perspective. The prophet's words are a call to trust, a gentle but firm correction, and a reminder that God's power is unmatched. And even though Asa reacts with anger, the story records it honestly, showing that even good leaders can misstep. It's almost comforting in a way because it makes Asa relatable. Even kings who follow God can make mistakes, but the key is to learn from them and adjust. Aquisa, what's also interesting is that this episode emphasizes the importance of remembering past victories that came from God. Hanani specifically reminds Asa of a previous time when he relied on the Lord and God delivered his enemies into his hands. That moment of reflection is crucial. It's like saying, look, you've seen God's power before, don't forget how he works. It's a lesson that resonates in our own lives. When we face challenges, remembering past experiences of God's faithfulness can guide us and strengthen our trust, instead of relying solely on our own methods. Now, the story also makes it clear that this kind of reliance on human solutions can have consequences. Hanani tells Asa that because he didn't rely on God, he will face ongoing wars. It's a sobering reminder that shortcuts or strategies without God's guidance might achieve temporary gains, but they can also lead to prolonged challenges or unintended consequences. And in Asa's case, even though he's otherwise a righteous king, this misstep creates a ripple effect that influences the stability of his kingdom and his people's safety. But let's not miss the bigger picture here. Asa's conflict with Israel, his temporary alliance with Syria, and the prophet's rebuke all serve as a layered narrative about faith, human judgment, and divine accountability. It's a story that shows the complexity of leadership and the importance of aligning every decision with God's will. The political and military maneuvers are dramatic and tense. Sure, but the spiritual lessons are what make this story enduring. And I love that it's presented in a way that's relatable. We can all identify with situations where we try to solve problems in our own strength, whether it's through money, influence, or clever tactics. And sometimes, like Asa, those solutions work temporarily, but the underlying message is consistent. God's intervention is what ultimately brings lasting victory. It's a reminder to not just rely on what we can see, calculate, or control. True reliance requires trust in God, even when the path forward isn't obvious. As the story continues, Judah under Asa maintains its commitment to God, but the conflict with Israel persists. Baasha remains a looming threat, and Asa has to balance defense, spiritual reforms, and governance. The ongoing tension keeps the story dynamic and teaches multiple lessons simultaneously. Leadership requires courage. Strategic thinking must be tempered with faith, and even righteous people can stumble if they neglect reliance on God. And there's a human side to all of this too. Imagine Asa sitting in his palace, watching the northern armies, worrying about his people, and weighing options. On one hand, he's got the spiritual reforms he's implementing. On the other, he's facing immediate military threats. The pressure is immense, and he makes a choice that seems practical, but isn't fully aligned with God's will. It's a vivid picture of human complexity, making tough decisions under pressure, with the risk of unintended consequences. In the end, this story reminds us that even good leaders, even those committed to God, have to stay vigilant in all aspects of life. Spiritual faithfulness, strategic thinking, and reliance on God must go hand in hand. Asa's reliance on Syria shows that it's easy to slip into thinking we can handle challenges on our own, and the prophet's rebuke reinforces the truth that God sees everything, guides those who trust him, and calls us back when we stray. So, as we look at this conflict between Judah and Israel, we see a rich narrative full of tension, strategy, and spiritual lessons. Asa's temporary victory through human means demonstrates ingenuity, but it also highlights the limits of relying solely on our own efforts. Hanani's confrontation reminds us that ultimate victory and security come from God, not our resources, plans, or alliances. And as Judah continues under Asa's long reign, these lessons about trust, faith, and reliance on God are woven into the fabric of the kingdom, shaping its future and offering timeless wisdom for us today. Ultimately, the ongoing conflicts between Judah and Israel, Asa's bold but flawed decisions, and the prophetic correction all serve as a powerful story about leadership, faith, and discernment. It's not just history, it's a story that challenges us to consider how we approach our own obstacles, decisions, and reliance on God. The drama, the tension, and the human error all make it engaging and relatable, but the core takeaway is clear. Trust in God, seek His guidance, and remember that even clever strategies can't replace divine intervention. Alright, now we're jumping back up north to Israel, and let me tell you, the story of the northern kings after Jeroboam is straight up wild. I mean, if you thought politics today were messy, just wait until you hear about Nab, Baasha, Zimri, Omri, and all the chaos that followed. It's like a non-stop drama series, full of assassinations, betrayals, and power grabs, and honestly, it's kind of jaw-dropping when you put it all together. So, let's start with Nab. Nab becomes king of Israel in the second year of Asa's reign in Judah, but he doesn't exactly start off on a good foot. He walks in the sins of Jeroboam, which basically means he continues the idolatry and wicked practices that had plagued Israel since Jeroboam first set up those golden calves. And here's the thing, Nab doesn't just rule quietly, he's actively evil in the sight of the Lord, and that sets the stage for his downfall. Enter Baasha, the son of Ahijah from the tribe of Issachar. This guy is ambitious, ruthless, and not afraid to get his hands dirty to claim power. Baasha conspires against Nab, while Nab and all of Israel are laying siege to Gibeon, which belonged to the Philistines. And here's where it gets really intense. Baasha kills Nab at Gibeon and then seizes the throne for himself. Can you imagine? 1 minute you're king, the next you're dead because some general decided he could do better. And Baasha doesn't stop there. He goes on to annihilate the entire house of Jeroboam. No survivors. It's brutal. But in his mind, it's strategic. Eliminate any potential rivals who could challenge his rule, and, spoiler alert, this is actually fulfilling a prophecy that had been given earlier about the downfall of Jeroboam's family. So it is prophecy meets political intrigue, and it's a deadly combination. Baasha reigns for a while, but the violence doesn't stop with him. Fast forward a bit, and Zimri comes into the picture. Zimri is the commander of half the king's chariots, so he's got military muscle and a bit of ambition to match. And here's the crazy part, he assassinates Elah, Baasha's son and successor, right in his own palace. While Elah is drinking and letting his guard down, Zimri doesn't hesitate. He kills Elah and all the members of Baasha's household, claiming the throne for himself. It's ruthless, it's dramatic, and honestly, it's a little hard to believe that people actually lived through this level of court intrigue. But Zimri's reign, almost comically short. He's king for just 7 days. 7! And then the people in the army, who had been encamped at Gibeon, decide they've had enough. They choose someone else, Omri, to be king. When Zimri realizes that the army is coming for him and that his rule is over before it's barely begun, he makes a desperate move. He goes into the citadel of the king's house, sets it on fire, and dies in the flames. I mean, wow, talk about a dramatic exit. It's almost cinematic. The palace burning, the king trapped inside, the empire in turmoil. And it just shows how volatile the northern kingdom was during this period. Now Omri steps in, and this guy is a bit more methodical. He doesn't just grab power through a single assassination, he deals with the divided factions of Israel, some of whom were backing another contender, and eventually consolidates control. Omri reigns for 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah, and he's strategic in establishing a new capital, Samaria. He buys a hill from someone named Shemer, builds the city, and names it Samaria. This is a big move because it creates a lasting administrative and political center for the northern kingdom, but it also sets the stage for future tensions and conflicts with Judah. And then comes Omri's son, Ahab. Now, Ahab is a whole different level of intrigue and chaos. He reigns for 22 years and does evil in the sight of the Lord more than all the kings before him. And here's where things get personal. He marries Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, a Sidonian king and priest of Baal. So, now you have the northern king married into a family that's deeply tied to idol worship, and he brings those cult practices into Israel. Altars for Baal pop up, idols go up, and the spiritual landscape of the north deteriorates further. It's political strategy mixed with spiritual disaster, and it's fascinating because you can see how marriages and alliances weren't just about power, they could completely reshape the culture and religion of a kingdom. But the intrigue doesn't end there. During all of this, there are smaller power plays, coups, and assassinations sprinkled throughout the timeline. The Northern Kingdom is basically a high-stakes game where the players aren't just kings, they're generals, military commanders, and ambitious nobles who can seize power at any moment if they're ruthless enough. And they are. They really are. Reading this part of the story, you can't help but react like, wait, what just happened? Every few minutes, one king dies, another is assassinated, someone burns themselves in a palace, and the next thing you know, a new king is sitting on the throne with a completely different strategy. It's intense, chaotic, and completely gripping. What's fascinating is how prophecy and divine judgment weave through all of this. Many of the assassinations and violent acts aren't just political, they're fulfilling prophecies. Baasha killing off the house of Jeroboam is a fulfillment of what had been foretold because of Jeroboam's idolatry. Zimri's short-lived reign and dramatic suicide also tie into the narrative of divine judgment and chaos in a kingdom that had turned away from God. It's like the history of Israel is a tangled web of human ambition and divine sovereignty, constantly interacting in ways that are shocking and unforgettable. And throughout all of this, there's a clear pattern. The Northern Kingdom struggles with loyalty to God, political instability, and violent power grabs. Unlike Judah, where Asa is trying to implement reforms and create a lasting legacy rooted in faith, the North is like a storm. Constant coups, assassinations, and intrigue. Each new king brings a mix of ambition, ruthlessness, and some level of evil in the sight of God. It's dramatic, yes, but also illustrative of what happens when a kingdom loses its moral and spiritual compass. Omri's establishment of Samaria as the capital is significant because it provides a semblance of stability after years of chaos. But even with that administrative move, the spiritual issues remain, especially with Ahab bringing Jezebel and Baal worship into the fold. And you can see how this sets up not just political and military conflicts, but ongoing spiritual battles within the kingdom. It's a reminder that leadership isn't just about surviving the next coup, it's about the values and direction you instill in your people. One of the things that makes this sequence of Northern Kings so compelling is how fast things change. Today there's one ruler, tomorrow he's dead, and the next day someone new is on the throne. The instability keeps the people on edge and shows how fragile a kingdom can be when leaders act without moral or spiritual grounding. And the drama, the betrayals, the assassinations, they're almost like the plot twists in a thriller series. Except this is real history, and the stakes are life and death, not just entertainment. And yet, even amidst all this chaos, there's a thread of divine oversight. Prophecies are being fulfilled, judgments are taking place, and the narrative emphasizes that God is still watching, even if the kings themselves are blinded by ambition or greed. Baasha, Zimri, Omri, and Ahab are all human players making human decisions, but they're also part of a larger divine story. That's what makes the narrative not just dramatic, but deeply meaningful. It's human action intersecting with divine purpose in ways that are often shocking and unexpected. By the time Ahab takes the throne, the pattern is clear. The Northern Kingdom is a hotbed of intrigue, violence, and spiritual corruption. And yet, the story is captivating because it reads like a suspenseful tale full of twists, betrayals, and shocking outcomes. Every new king brings uncertainty, and every move, assassination, marriage, building a city, has consequences. And that's exactly what makes it so engaging. You never quite know what's coming next, and the stakes are always high. Ultimately, this sequence of Northern Kings shows us a few key things in a really gripping way. First, ambition unchecked by morality or faith can lead to chaos and bloodshed. Second, political power in Israel at this time was incredibly fragile. It could change in an instant depending on who was willing to be ruthless enough to seize it. And third, even in the midst of human scheming and violence, God's plan and prophetic word are being fulfilled, whether the kings realize it or not. So, Nab, Baasha, Zimri, Omri, and Ahab, they're not just names in a history book. They're part of a high-stakes, dramatic saga of ambition, betrayal, and divine oversight. It's a story that grabs your attention, shocks you with its twists, and ultimately reminds you that human power alone is never enough. The north is a kingdom in turmoil, a place where kings rise and fall, where plots and murders shape the narrative, and where the consequences of turning away from God are made clear in the bloodstained pages of history. And honestly, reading it, you can't help but feel like you're watching an epic drama unfold in real time, complete with all the tension, suspense, and moral lessons that make history feel alive. Alright, so now we get to Omri and his son Ahab, and oh boy, this part of the story is intense. Omri comes in after all the chaos with Zimri and the factions in Israel, and he's a shrewd, calculating guy. He's the one who finally buys a hill from a man named Shemer and builds a new capital called Samaria. That's a smart political move. It centralizes power and gives the northern kingdom a more permanent seat of government, but don't let that fool you. Omri is still walking in evil ways, continuing the sins of Jeroboam, and his reign is marked by idolatry and spiritual corruption. He's strategic, sure, but morally, not great. Then comes Ahab, Omri's son, and things get even more dramatic. Ahab reigns for 22 years, and the Bible doesn't hold back when it says he did more evil in the sight of the Lord than any of the kings before him. That's quite a statement, and one of the major turning points is his marriage to Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, the king of Sidon. Now, hold on, this isn't just any royal marriage. Jezebel comes from a deeply pagan culture. Her father is a cult priest of Baal, so when she comes into Israel, she brings all the Baal worship practices with her. And you can imagine what that does. Suddenly, the northern kingdom is flooded with idolatry at the highest levels, and Ahab fully participates. Altars to Baal go up, idols are set up, and the spiritual climate of Israel takes a massive nosedive. It's shocking how one marriage can shift the entire kingdom's religious direction. But it doesn't stop there. Ahab, in his ambition, does something else that's both shocking and a direct defiance of God's command. He rebuilds the city of Jericho, which had been cursed centuries earlier by Joshua after the Israelites originally conquered it. According to the prophecy in Joshua 6, anyone who rebuilt Jericho would do so at the cost of their children. God had intended Jericho to remain a permanent testimony of his faithfulness and victory for over 500 years. And now here comes Ahab, ignoring the warning, setting up the city again, building gates, and establishing it as a functional urban center. Wait, what? Yeah, it's wild to think that a king would go against a command that had been in place for half a millennium. Hey, the audacity alone is staggering. And as the story unfolds, the consequences predicted by God's word come to pass. True to the prophecy, the rebuilding leads to the death of Ahab's sons, fulfilling what God had declared long before. It's a mind-blowing example of divine justice and timing. God's promises or warnings don't expire just because centuries have passed. 500 years later, the prophecy still holds true. That's both awe-inspiring and, honestly, a little terrifying when you think about it. It shows that God is meticulous, faithful, and absolutely committed to his word. Nothing falls through the cracks, no matter how long it takes, and the spiritual implications are huge. Ahab's alliance with Jezebel isn't just political, it's religious. By marrying her, he introduces and legitimizes Baal worship in the northern kingdom, which further provokes God's anger. Altars are set up, idols are made, and the people begin to stray even further from the covenant they had with God. This isn't just bad leadership, it's a national spiritual crisis, and it all traces back to the decisions Ahab makes, from whom he marries to what cities he rebuilds. The story really underscores how leadership choices, especially at the top, can have massive ripple effects for an entire society. Now, I want you to pause and think about the contrast here. On the one hand, you have Asa in Judah making reforms, removing idols, and honoring God. On the other, you have Ahab in Israel, embracing idolatry, bringing in Jezebel, and defying a long-standing prophecy. The contrast is stark, and it really drives home the idea that leadership aligned with God versus leadership ignoring God has real, tangible consequences. And it's not just immediate consequences, it's long-term, far-reaching, and in the case of Jericho, literally prophetic. What's really striking in this story is the idea of divine timing. God's word about Jericho was given even 500 years earlier, and yet the fulfillment comes exactly as promised. That's wild. It's a reminder that God's perspective on time is totally different from ours. What might seem long or delayed from a human viewpoint is perfect timing in the divine plan. And this applies to both warnings and promises. God is faithful to accomplish exactly what he says, whether it's for judgment or for blessing. And it's easy to have a natural reaction like, wait, so Ahab's kids die because he rebuilt a city? Yeah, that's exactly what happens. It's shocking, it's sobering, and it really hits home the seriousness of disobeying God. But at the same time, it underscores that God's justice is precise and inevitable. It's not arbitrary, it's purposeful. There's a lesson here about respecting God's commands, about understanding that what he declares has weight and power, even centuries later. Meanwhile, Jezebel isn't just a background character. She actively shapes Israel's spiritual climate. Her presence is like a catalyst that accelerates the kingdom's descent into idolatry. She encourages Baal worship, opposes God's prophets, and influences Ahab's decisions in ways that escalate the moral decay. And you can almost picture the tension in the royal court. Prophets confronting the king, people witnessing the idolatry, and the culture of the north shifting under the influence of one powerful woman and her royal husband. It's a reminder that choices, alliances, and relationships at the top levels of leadership can dramatically impact the spiritual and social health of a nation. And yet, through all this, we see the consistency of God's plan. Even with the evil, the defiance, and the idolatry, God's word is fulfilled. The prophecy against Jericho comes true. The consequences for Ahab's family play out as foretold. It's a stunning display of divine faithfulness. God does what he says, in his timing, and with perfect precision. And that's both comforting and sobering. It's comforting because we can trust that God will keep his promises to those who follow him. It's sobering because it shows that defiance and disobedience carry real, unavoidable consequences. Reading this story in a conversational way, it's almost like watching a thriller unfold. You've got political maneuvering, ambitious kings, prophetic warnings, dramatic marriages, and the shocking fulfillment of a centuries-old prophecy. The stakes are high, the tension is palpable, and the lessons are crystal clear. God is faithful, his word is true, and the decisions of leaders, whether righteous or evil, have real impact, often beyond what they can immediately see. And it's fascinating to reflect on the scale of time here. 500 years is a long period, right? Yet God's command regarding Jericho is fulfilled exactly as he said. It's like a reminder that nothing in God's plan is too far out of reach. Human timelines don't constrain him. And while the people of Israel might have thought they could rebuild, innovate, or ignore the past, God's word was unwavering. This is a lesson in patience, timing, and divine consistency that's as relevant now as it was back then. So, the story of Omri and Ahab isn't just about political maneuvering or evil deeds. It's about the intersection of human ambition, spiritual choices, and divine justice. Omri consolidates power and establishes Samaria, but he continues in sin. Ahab, ambitious and influenced by Jezebel, escalates idolatry, defies prophecy, and rebuilds Jericho. The consequences unfold exactly as God had promised, 500 years after the original command, showing that God is always faithful, even across generations. It's hard not to react with a mixture of shock and awe reading this. Shock at the boldness of Ahab's defiance, awe at the precision of God's plan, and reflection on the idea that choices, especially for leaders, have both immediate and far-reaching consequences. The story highlights the power of influence, the dangers of ignoring God's commands, and the reality that divine justice is both patient and inevitable. And yet, even in the midst of this, there's hope. God's faithfulness is constant, and his word always comes to pass, whether in judgment or blessing. In the end, the tale of Omri and Ahab reminds us that history isn't just a series of events. It's a story filled with lessons about obedience, faith, justice, and timing. It's about seeing the consequences of choices, recognizing the influence of relationships, and understanding that God's plans unfold perfectly, even if we don't always understand the timing. The North under Omri and Ahab is a dramatic, cautionary tale, full of intrigue, evil deeds, and shocking events. But it also underscores the unshakable truth that God keeps his word, even across centuries, and that his justice and faithfulness are absolute. Wow, so looking back at all these kings, the good, the bad, the chaotic, it's clear choices have consequences, faithfulness matters, and God's promises are rock solid, even across generations. It really makes you think about your own life, right? Who or what are we putting first? And, well, if you've been enjoying diving into these stories and lessons with me, it's kind of fun to stick around, see what comes next. And yeah, maybe hit like or subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter.